Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I'm Ian Demars. Alongside me always is Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, it's that time of the year. The NFL is finally underway. Training camps are just opening up. How excited are you right now?
Well, we get to see which people were bluffing when they said they were going to skip training camp or miss mini camps and things like that. So now we get to see who's really walking the walk and who is just talking the talk.
Exactly. We just saw the rookies. They started reporting as of a couple days ago. Some teams have already got all their players together. So it's a very exciting time. We're basically a few weeks away from actually getting a little bit of NFL action with the preseason starting, but it's definitely an exciting time of the year. I know I was talking to some of my coworkers today, and they were just talking about how since the draft to today, basically, they were just bored out of their mind. But now that training camps have started, the feeling of football coming back is definitely in the air.
Yeah, my little brother actually said that he has forgotten about football for a while. And he was like, it's really interesting how you can actually just forget about it. And then all of a sudden it comes back and you're like, oh, wait, I remember that. Now I'm going to be watching that every weekend.
Yeah, and it's very exciting. Obviously, not just the NFL, but obviously college football. This Canadian Football League has been going on for the past few weeks as well. The XFL, which is set to start in 2020. This is going to be a huge year, I think, for football overall. Not just with the product currently out there with the NFL, obviously college football, but I'm really curious to see what happens with this XFL.
Yeah, I know that you're very fascinated by the XFL. I'm not as interested quite yet because I thought the AAF was cool until it just completely went bankrupt. So I think maybe after it's been around for a year or two, then I'll pay some closer attention to it.
Yeah, and like I said, we still got a few months for that, but let's get started with some breaking news that actually just happened over the past couple of hours. So, Tennessee Titans safety Kevin Byard has recently agreed to a new deal with the Titans, which makes him the highest paid safety in the NFL. He gets a 5-year deal, just over $70 million, and over 31 million in guaranteed. What's your first reaction to this, and how big is this for the Titans and Kevin?
Well, it's hard to say how big it is for the Titans because we don't really know what direction the franchise is going to be going in because their most important player is not on defense. It's Marcus Mariota, and we still have not seen whether or not he can actually be the franchise player that they need him to be. For Kevin Byard, it's a little surprising to me that he's now the highest paid safety in the NFL because he's only been in the league for 3 seasons. So his first season, he didn't really do a whole lot. I mean, he played in 16 games, started 7, and then he played and started all 16 games the next 2 years in 2017, 2018. He had 8 interceptions in 2017, so definitely trending up, but then down to 4 in 2018. And then tackles total, he had 87 in 17 and then 90 in 2018. So while we've seen some good things out of him the past 2 seasons, I don't know that there's enough there for the long duration of time to say that he deserves to be the highest paid safety in the NFL.
And I think this is my take on the scenario the Titans are put in. They were going to pay either Marcus Mariota or Kevin Byard. Marcus Mariota has been inconsistent since coming to the NFL. We've seen some good signs from him, but we've also seen him fall back after he shows those good signs. He's also been injured, so we really haven't seen him play up to the potential that the Titans thought he would play with him being the second overall pick. Kevin Byard, these last couple of years, has shown that he can be one of the top safeties in the league. As you mentioned a couple of years ago, led the NFL in interceptions with 8. Last year had 90 tackles. So this guy is a very good ball hawk in the secondary and definitely someone to keep an eye out for. And that's why the Titans wanted to lock this guy up. And in order to do that, that meant giving him a lot of money. And they did that by making him the highest paid safety in the NFL. So they had the choice here. They were either going to pay Marcus Mariota or they were going to pay Kevin Byard. And due to the fact that Marcus Mariota has been inconsistent since coming to the league, it was obvious based off of play that Kevin Byard deserved this contract.
But you know what happens when you pay somebody that amount of money and it's like only a few years is that they don't have to prove it anymore. So he has that money. He has guarantees in his contract. And we see it in mostly wide receivers and defensive backs, it seems. I mean, you remember a few years ago, Josh Norman was the best player in the NFL from the defensive side of the ball. And then they gave him a ton of money in Washington. He just hasn't really lived up to the expectations. So when you drop that kind of money on a player, some of the incentive to prove themselves goes down. There's nothing left that they need to do. They're the highest paid player at their position in the league. So what do they have to try for anymore?
Yeah, that's a very solid point right there. I think there's a different case though between Byard and Josh Norman. The reason why I'm saying that is because Josh Norman is more of a one-sided defensive back. He typically only plays one side of the field. Rarely do you see him actually sticking with the star wide receiver on the team. He'll only stick to his side of the field no matter what. With Kevin Byard, we don't see that. This guy's all around the field all the time. So there's differences. You can make an argument that Josh Norman is the best corner on one side of the field, but he's not the best overall cornerback. He's a good cornerback, yes. I'm not saying he's elite, he's very good, but you can make an argument that when it comes to one side of the field, he might be the best, but he's not the best because he doesn't play both sides.
I'm just saying, look for his statistics to go down next year. I don't think they're going to go up, and I don't think they're going to hold. I think you're going to see maybe a similar amount of receptions, probably less tackles, less passes defense. So I'm not expecting him to continue to rise. I think that this is going to be his plateau now that he's gotten his money.
And now switching things to the team aspect, how do you think this is going to affect the team overall? Do you think this puts more pressure on Byard? Maybe it take a lot more pressure on Mariota because he didn't get the money? Or how's this team going to play out with this happening?
It's hard to say. I think that depends on if Marcus Mariota has a good season or not. We've seen sometimes when there's prove-it type seasons for players, they really flourish and they do well, and sometimes they just completely bust. And so this is Marcus Mariota's chance to prove that he deserves to be paid. I don't think that we've seen enough from Marcus Mariota to warrant him getting a big contract over Kevin Byard from his career so far. So this is his time to show that he actually belongs in the NFL and can lead this team, and then he can get paid if he proves that.
Yeah, and you look at, obviously, the defense, I think, has been a steady spot for the Titans, and I think that's why they want to make sure they keep one of their main pieces that's still young, intact for the foreseeable future. So we'll have to look to see how this plays out for them, but definitely is a good sign for Byard to start off training camp. But let's get to some of the other news that happened this past week. And there was one that was pretty big news late last week, and that was that upon review with the NFL and Tyreek Hill, they have decided that they will not be disciplining him for these alleged actions. Now, there was never any video evidence. It was all recordings. And I know we've discussed this before. We thought that was part of the reason why he won't get as much of a punishment as if anything. Now, since it's finalized, he will not be. How big of a win is this for the Chiefs?
This is huge for the Chiefs, and I've been a big proponent of the value of Tyreek Hill on that team for a long time. And you saw last year, he did it all. He returned punts. He took screen passes the distance. He spread the field going deep. He took reverses, handoffs. He's very multifaceted in that offense, and I think that Patrick Mahomes needs him. I think that's one of the reasons Patrick Mahomes was able to have so much success is because these teams had to key on Tyreek Hill and where he was so much that it really spread the field and opened up a lot of holes for Mahomes to throw the ball in and run through. So having Hill there the whole year is huge for this team, and I think that it switches from the Chargers having a bit of an advantage pre-Melvin Gordon issues to now post-Melvin Gordon issues and post-Tyreek Hill coming back for the whole season. I think that the Chiefs are the clear favorite now. I don't think it's even close anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely a big win for them. The reason being they don't have to deal with months and months of negotiation. And that was kind of the interesting thing that happened about this. The NFL, when they go into investigations regarding some of these cases, it seems like they kind of are laid back when they do their research. We sometimes see cases where they don't even start looking into a case after a few months after the incident happened or is accused of whatever incident it is. So it's big for the Chiefs, but this makes me, and this obviously makes them still one of the favorites in the AFC, but this kind of makes me question how the NFL is reviewing all these cases. I feel like a lot of these cases, they're making these abrupt decisions without actually doing enough extensive research to kind of figure out what happened and what didn't happen. But I do agree that this is huge for the Chiefs. It's a big win for Tyreek Hill. They get one of their star players back, and they're obviously going to be in prime position next year.
I was really surprised that there wasn't some kind of punishment, because I feel like whenever you hear the terms domestic abuse, there has to be some sort of punishment given out, even if there's no evidence of it. In the NFL, you do not want that bad publicity from domestic violence to creep into a season. And so I was surprised that we didn't at least see a 2-game suspension.
Yeah, and I knew this was something we would kind of question, and that kind of leads into our new question of the week, which has recently just posted on our Facebook and Twitter pages. It's regarding Tyreek Hill. It's regarding if the NFL did the right thing by not punishing him. In this case, I mean, it kind of seems like we're both leaning towards they didn't. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
I mean, I don't know if it was the right call, but I thought that was the expected call to make. In my opinion, if there's no evidence of domestic violence, then there's no reason to punish for it. But it just seems like, to be on the safe side, that's what they've been doing lately.
Yeah, I think this was a safe play by the NFL. It just goes back to what I was just saying, that I don't think they did enough research into this. I feel like this is something where they're going to make they make this decision, and then a couple of months later, some sort of evidence is going to leak out, and it ends up not only looking bad for Tyreek Hill, but it's going to look even worse for the NFL for not realizing this or not looking into this more. So if this does end up coming back to hurt them, it's obviously going to be a big hurt for the league, I think. So I think that making a decision, I feel like they were pressured to make a decision just because it was before training camp.
Right. It's the Ray Rice conundrum, where if any evidence does come out, then they look bad, then they have to do a bigger punishment than they probably would have done initially. So surprised, and I think that it would have been a good way to get people to stop talking about it with just 2-game suspension. But good for the Chiefs that he is not suspended.
Yeah, it's good for the Chiefs. And again, if you want to vote on that question of the week, check out our pages on Facebook and Twitter. It will be up for the whole week. We do want to give our results for last week's question regarding who would hold out longer between Jadeveon Clowney and Melvin Gordon. Facebook and Twitter were unanimous. Both were in the 60%, 66 on Facebook, 63 on Twitter, said that it was going to be Jadeveon Clowney that actually holds out longer. Now, last week, we were both on opposite sides of this. I had said Jadeveon Clowney. You had said Melvin Gordon. Based off of these results, are you still sticking with Gordon?
Yes, I am sticking with Gordon.
And you might have a good case there, because there have been reports that his agent has already told the Chargers and that Gordon has already told his teammates that he's not reporting. And reports also show that apparently his teammates are supporting Gordon with his decision. So that'll be interesting to see. We haven't heard too much yet regarding Clowney's case, but it does seem like both these players could be holding off for quite some time, possibly into the middle of the preseason. But that's something that is going to be obviously some of the headlines with training camp just starting. But let's move on to some surprising moves that happened right before training camp start for veteran players. So we saw some major cuts happen this past week. The Cowboys, they cut wide receiver Allen Hurns. We saw the Redskins, they cut their leading tackler from last year, Mason Foster. And the move that happened today was actually Mike Daniels getting cut by the Green Bay Packers. Now, you look at the scenarios, Allen Hurns didn't really produce that much for the Cowboys last year. Mason Foster, there was some money. I feel like it was more of a money play, but there were also some reports of him saying something that kind of led to him getting cut. And then Mike Daniels is kind of a weird scenario where not too many people know why, but part of of people think that it's due to money as well. So, which one do you think is which team do you think lost the most by cutting one of these players?
Well, Mike Daniels was important to the Packers for a while, but some injury problems. He wasn't quite as productive as he was before. They had him on a big contract. So from the outside perspective, that one looks like it could be important. But the one that I want to point to most is Mason Foster. And the reason for that is because he was a pretty solid player for the Redskins. Like, he wasn't one of their absolute star players, but he was being productive on that linebacking core. And he was constantly in position battles for the past 3 years with Washington, but he always found a way to win them out and turn in good games and have pretty good seasons. So I felt like he was a pretty dependable starter. He wasn't spectacular, but I think that production in that defense is going to be missed.
Yeah, looking at the three teams, I think we're pretty obvious that the Hearns one isn't as important just because he didn't really produce, and obviously he's coming off of that injury against the Seahawks in the playoffs. You look at Daniels and Foster, you can obviously make a good case for both. I think the Packers, I think they made a better choice to cut Daniels in this case. There were reports that they gave Dean Lowry an extension as a result. And you look at Daniels, obviously was making a good amount of money on a contract he signed back in 2015. Made a Pro Bowl as an alternate a few years ago with the Packers and has been a solid producer for them. But obviously money. He missed a couple games a couple years ago, missed a decent portion of last year due to a foot injury. And with him being a lineman, a foot injury is a pretty significant deal to have to come back from. So there were reports that he wasn't even all set to come back yet. So I think that was also part of why the Packers did it. So I actually agree with you saying that Foster is going to be lost the most from these three teams. Obviously, being a leading tackler, a big impact player in the linebacker position, a very tough position to kind of fill in a spot for a guy who was so dependent for them last year. We're still kind of figuring out the exact issues. Like I said, there were reports that he had said something to someone right before the cut, but I think it was more money as well. They have some guys on their roster that they do want to sign to long-term extensions, a couple on the O-line, which I think is something that they need to keep intact. So it's unfortunate that they did cut him or did let him go, but I don't know. Of these three, who do you think is more likely to get signed first?
Ooh, probably Allen Hurns, I think, because it's a low investment signing. So he's been sort of on the decline lately. You could probably get him for a little cheaper. It's less of a big investment. There are a lot of teams out there that could just use another receiver in training camp to see how they can do. So I wouldn't be surprised if he got picked up first.
Even coming off of that injury in the playoffs, you think he'd still be that first one?
Because this is a fine time to sign him, because you could just sign him to a small contract and then cut him.
Yeah, and you look at the other two. I was talking to someone about this today. I told them regarding Mike Daniels, it wouldn't surprise me if a month from now he's still not signed. I feel like he's going to be one of those guys that he's going to want a decent amount of money, and a team's not going to give him the money he wants until a significant injury happens in the preseason. Because unfortunately, there is usually at least one of those that happen where a guy gets cut, they don't get signed until someone gets injured. It's unfortunate, but that ends up happening. Mason Foster, I think with his leading tackle experience from last year, is going to get someone to sign him right away, who I really don't know. I think it's kind of open right now as training camp's just starting. But I feel like he would probably sign, I think, the soonest out of all three of them. The reason why I'm not saying Hurns is just because I'm still questioning that injury. I'm not sure if he's fully healed yet, and I feel like that's something that could hold teams back from actually signing him.
You see, that's fine, but then you both know, the athlete knows and the organization knows that he needs to test out, his body to see if he can actually do this at a high level. So I think that the expectation for that contract being small would be better than Mason Foster, who's going to want more money, or like you said, Daniels, who's going to want more money. So that's more of a risk signing than Hearns, because Hearns isn't going to be asking for as much.
That's a good point, but I think a thing that you're kind of forgetting about is he's not full. I don't believe he's fully healed yet, and I don't think no one's even going to take a risk on him until he shows that he's ready to compete. And who knows how long that's going to be, because that injury in the playoffs was a pretty devastating injury that he suffered.
We should keep track of this and put it on a whiteboard somewhere, and then we can see which one actually gets signed first and then go back to it.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep track of this for us, and then who knows, maybe by next week we'll have our answers on which one of them did get signed.
Yeah, same with the Melvin Gordon and Jadeveon Clowney debate.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Let's switch Let's switch topics now. So we did have another player recently retire from the NFL. Some people might know him as the Sanchez. We refer to him as the guy who started the butt fumble. That's Mark Sanchez, officially retiring from the NFL. He has actually took a job with ESPN to be a college football analyst for the station. So regarding Mark Sanchez, is he only going to be remembered for the butt fumble?
Well, there's lots of interesting things to remember Mark Sanchez for. Could be one of the worst quarterbacks ever to make consecutive back-to-back conference championship games. Could be one of the most interesting tattoos ever put on a coach, when a tattoo of Rex Ryan's wife wearing a Mark Sanchez jersey was spotted on Rex Ryan's arm. And then you, of course, do have the butt fumble. And what gets lost on all this was there was a little moment in time where Rex Ryan was the coach, Mark Sanchez was the Sanchez franchise quarterback, and that team was making it to the playoffs and making deep runs in the playoffs and beating the Patriots on their way to some of these playoff runs. So Mark Sanchez did have some decent years, but in the end, he turned out to be a very subpar quarterback. He'll probably be remembered most for the butt fumble, but for those that grew up in an era watching him play on the circus that surrounded the Jets under Rex Ryan's regime, I think there's going to be more things to remember him for than just that one play.
Yeah, with Mark Sanchez, obviously, he had a great start to his career. He was a top 5 pick, 5th overall by the Jets, led them to 2 AFC championship games his first 2 years in the league. Then it kind of fell apart for him. Obviously, the team started not playing well. He started turning the ball over a lot more, had the butt fumble, which kind of derailed his career a little bit. There was a quarterback controversy when Tim Tebow signed with the Jets. Then he started becoming a backup, showed a little bit of good signs when he had his chances with the Philadelphia Eagles. And then from there, kind of was just more of a consistent guy with the Bears, with the Cowboys. I believe most recently with the Redskins, he did get a game. He did start a game for them this year. So he definitely had a up and down career, I guess you could say. Started up, and then it kind of just went down from there. It picked up a little bit because, I mean, if he could have played worse after the butt fumble, I mean, obviously it would have just been a straight downhill shot. But he did get some more opportunities, played decent, had a decent career, and obviously I think he's going to be well-suited as a college football analyst for ESPN.
Just another former USC quarterback that didn't make it in the NFL.
Yeah, it's crazy to see that USC has so many quarterbacks that end up getting drafted, but yet so many of them end up struggling to find success in this league.
I mean, really the most successful in recent memory was Carson Palmer.
Yeah.
And you have to go back almost 2 decades.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how would you describe success with him, the fact that he was able to make it so long in the NFL. Because remember, the guy never won a Super Bowl. He made it to, I believe it was just one conference championship game when he was with the Cardinals a few years ago. But he did definitely have a solid career for them. Now, speaking of USC quarterbacks, there is one currently starting in the NFL in Sam Darnold. What path is he likely to follow? The Mark Sanchez, Matt Leinart, those kind of guys, or the Carson Palmer path?
I mean, he looked good his first year, but so did Mark Sanchez. So we're going to have to wait for a bigger sample size to really pass a judgment on him.
Yeah, it's kind of tough because Obviously, there are some turnover issues, which kind of makes you think, oh, this guy could be a Mark Sanchez or something like that. But I mean, he also had his good signs that kind of made you look like, oh, this looked like Mark Sanchez when he first came to the league. So early signs make him like, oh, it could be a Mark Sanchez, but obviously he still has some time. He's got a lot more better weapons with him this upcoming year. So I definitely think that we're going to see an uptick in this play this year.
Okay, I think he's going to have a little bit of a sophomore slump, but that's just me.
Okay. We did have another player get an extension to go along with Kevin Byard, and that was Bengals wide receiver Tyler Boyd. He got a 4-year extension after having his first 1,000-yard season with the Bengals. Obviously had his best year in the league. They did have some struggles. He definitely got an uptick in playing time with an injury to AJ Green. Did he deserve this extension?
I'm going to go with a tentative yes. I don't know that he's deserved it because all of this extension is really based on last season in which he had 76 catches, over 1,000 yards, and 7 touchdowns. But what that does mean is that he's a player on the rise. And the Bengals have been looking for a guy that can be a solid number 2 pass catcher behind A.J. Green for a while. John Ross hasn't panned out. And he went from his rookie season, 603 yards, then his sophomore season, 225 yards, to all of a sudden that explosion of over 1,000. So it seems like he's going the right direction. It seems like he might be a guy who's capable of being that second receiver for the Bengals. And a team that sometimes struggles to find offense can't really afford to get rid of that.
With Boyd, I am in agreement. I do think that he did deserve this because this guy showed that he can be a back tier number 1 guy on a team. I definitely think he's a very good, solid number 2. We definitely saw a little bit of that his rookie year, kind of slumped his second year, but last year showed that he could be a playmaker. In fact, got to a point where I even traded for this guy in fantasy until he had an injury at the end of the year. But I do think that this is something that the Bengals are not going to regret. I think that's something that they needed to lock up some of these guys for their future because some of their main guys, meaning Dalton, Green, those are some guys that who knows how long they're going to be with the team. So it's definitely good to sign one of their guys who showed a big increase in play last year.
Yeah, I think we're both in agreement there. I think they made the right call. And the Bengals are a team that traditionally has gotten rid of people that are coming up as free agents if they have to pay them at all. So you remember Kevin Zeitler, they got rid of, and many more also. So it's interesting to see them go a different direction this time.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what all ends up happening. But let's move on to a couple players that actually did decide to report to training camp. Both Detroit Lions players, defensive back Darius Slay and defensive lineman Damon Harrison. Both, it seemed like we're looking to get newer contracts or kind of just looking to get out of their current situation. But both did end up reporting after missing mandatory minicamps. Now, we've talked about this obviously last week, a little bit earlier today, regarding some other players that are holding out. After seeing both Slay and Harrison report, are we going to see some of these other players who are planning to hold out report soon?
Probably. I don't know how many, and I don't think that seeing these 2 players' reports is going to influence their decision. But I think that it becomes more difficult to miss time when you're supposed to be there as opposed to these non-mandatory sort of situations. So I wouldn't be surprised if more people reported, but I don't think that it's going to issue in a wave of reportees coming to training camp.
Yeah, I think a lot of these players, when they do try to hold out, there's a good portion of them that will miss the mandatory offseason stuff. But once it gets to training camp, they're obviously in position where they want to get their money. They want to prove that they deserve something. So they end up just playing it out. And then for a decent amount of these players, they get the money that they want when they were negotiating before. Look at guys like Melvin Gordon's case, a guy who has shown an increase in play and I think definitely deserves a new contract. but still seems like they're far off. Some of these players that I think deserve the money are going to hold out. Some of these players that think that they still need to show something are going to report. So I think in most of these cases, we are going to see the majority of these players start reporting to camp, whether that's right on time, whether that's a couple days late, who knows. But I think the majority of these players holding out, they know that they might still have to show something. But some of these other players, like Melvin Gordon, like Jadeveon Clowney, they think that they need more money. They think that they are the cream of the crop of their class, and those are the guys that are going to hold out longer.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely true. The guys that know they don't have the leverage are going to have to come in, and the guys that do actually have something that they can use for their holdout are probably going to stick it out until they get the money that they're asking for.
Right on there. But this leads into us finally talking about training camp. It's that time of the year. So, with training camp starting, what's one major storyline that you think is going to be that's going to be covered a lot throughout training camp?
I think that one really big storyline is going to be how the Cleveland Browns are gelling together with all of the different talent pieces that they have there. So we've already heard a lot of talk about how the Cleveland Browns are going to be this year's great team that gets put together and that contends in a division that they haven't contended in for years. And I think that we're going to have the microscope on that Browns mini camp and training camp. We're going to be looking at Odell Beckham Jr., who I'm sure is going to say or do something that gets newspapers talking about him. And then we have Baker Mayfield, who, of course, never can shut up. So I think that we're going to be hearing a lot about the Browns this training camp.
I think that's definitely one of the teams that you have to look out for. Obviously, they have a lot of big-name players now on that team and some big personalities on that team. So definitely think that's going to be one of the major ones. The one that I'm focusing on is another team, the Oakland Raiders. Now, obviously, they're moving to Vegas next year. They're currently the NFL Hard Knocks team. So it's a big year for them overall. Getting Antonio Brown in a trade, John Gruden trying to get some of these pieces. The way he drafted this year is very interesting, drafting a lot of players that played in this past year's national championship game. So it's going to be interesting to see how all this works out for the Raiders, having the camera crews around during training camp, seeing how, like I said, all these championship performing rookies, how they fit with the team, and how this team plays getting ready to go to Las Vegas. How much pressure is going to be on them? Is there going to be a lot of hype? What's really going to happen? There's a lot of pressure on Derek Carr to prove that he's still the franchise quarterback for this team. There's a lot of question marks on this team. Do they have enough help with Antonio Brown there now? What's going to happen with the running back scenario? Is Josh Jacobs really their new number one? Their defense kind of has been inconsistent. What's going to happen there? There's a lot of things that are going on in Oakland, and obviously it's going to be very tough for them, especially with a bunch of camera crews following them throughout training camp.
It doesn't seem like the team that's on Hard Knocks really does well during the regular season, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I guess it's kind of funny that happens because usually the criteria to becoming on a Hard Knocks team is actually a team not performing well the last couple of years. So it's kind of surprising that they're starting to not find enough new teams because they're usually filming the same teams to begin with.
Yeah, I think they go more for the team that most closely resembles a soap opera as opposed to the one that's doing best or is on the rise. So I think that's part of why the team doesn't usually do well. This is going to be a fascinating year for the Raiders because they actually do have some good pieces in place and could be competitive, but that division is just killer. So we'll have to see if they can actually pull together a string of wins and contend for a wild card.
Yeah, and if it's going to be a good send-off from Oakland or a really Oakland just saying, get out of here, get to Vegas, we don't want you anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
But with that, we are getting close to the end of the show, which means it's our time of the show to talk about fantasy football. And we've done a lot of rankings over these last few weeks, and these last couple weeks we've kind of done some unique rankings. And this week we're doing another one. We're going to be ranking our top 5 players for the next 5 years. So we're doing this based off of how well we think current players in the NFL are going to be performing over the next 5 years. So, Ryan, how did you want to break this down? Did you want us one person to do their 5 and the other person to do their 5? Did you want to do one back and forth? How do you want
Let's
to do
go
this?
back and forth. That's always more entertaining.
All right, let's go 5-1. I'll let you go first. Who do you have at number 5?
Okay. First of all, I want to preface this by saying that this was difficult because you had to be creative about it, because it's almost impossible to know who's going to do well the next 5 years and who's even still going to be in the league, who's going to get injured, etc. So it requires some extrapolation. But at number 5, I have a guy that came on pretty strong last year, especially from a touchdown perspective, and that's Calvin Ridley. And so we've seen with the Falcons that they sort of pass the torch from one receiver to the next. First, there was Michael Jenkins way back in the day, kind of passed the torch to Roddy White. Roddy White kind of passed the torch to Julio Jones. And I think eventually Julio Jones is going to kind of pass that superstar wide receiver torch onto Calvin Ridley, who we saw was very capable his rookie year. So I think we can look for Calvin Ridley to only improve as the seasons go on. And eventually when Julio Jones gets a little bit older and closer to retirement, I think he's going to be the guy, Calvin Ridley.
I'll tell you what, that's a very bold pick to start off your top 5. I didn't even consider that guy, Calvin Ridley, when it came to my rankings. But I do like kind of the pattern that you showed. Like, hey, this is what the Falcons do. They have some great players based off of this. This could be the next one. I actually do like that a lot now thinking of it.
Yeah, it's something I noticed about them a while ago is that they always sort of have another receiver in waiting, and they never is just one guy. They're sort of like the Sith.
Yeah, so it'll be cool to see if that does end up happening, where he does get the keys to Atlanta from Julio. So number 5, I also have a wide receiver. I'm actually going with one who's kind of made some big news over the last couple of years, and that's Odell Beckham Jr. I like his fit in Cleveland with Baker Mayfield, and they have a great tandem with him and Jarvis Landry. I think that it's going to be tough to cover both these guys, and it's going to be very difficult to double team both these guys, which means there's going to be open space for one of these guys, and I think that's going to be Odell Beckham Jr. because we see Jarvis Landry is a guy that likes playing all over the field, so you really have to keep an eye on him. Odell Beckham, you can focus on keeping him on the outside, which means he's going to get a lot more opportunities to get one-on-one. So I think with him being in Cleveland, it seems like a team that's going to be more pass first than run first, that he's going to get a lot more opportunities now with a young quarterback with Baker Mayfield.
I think that's a really good pick, and I actually have him later on in my list that we will get to. But at number 4, I have Raiders' new running back, Josh Jacobs. And the Raiders have been looking for a guy for a long time who can carry a load at the running back position and be productive. And I think that they found something in Josh Jacobs. Of course, he still has not played an official NFL snap yet, so he could just flame out immediately. But I think that they're going to try their best to make sure that he has a decently long career in Oakland. I think we'll see him be getting the bulk of the carries probably for the next 3 to 5 years there.
Again, another pick that I never even thought of. And the reason why I didn't think about it is because I still kind of question this running back field in Oakland. But could this maybe be the one gem that they got in the first round? Because remember, they had 3 first-round picks this year, and there are some question marks regarding a couple of them. So this is the one that they got that was the diamond in the rough. That could be a huge win for them. So, but we'll see. My number 4, I also have a running back. I have New Orleans Saints running back Alvin Kamara. We've seen him definitely make some huge strides since coming to the league a couple years ago. And last year, we got to see a little bit of what he can do as the full-go number 1 back for a team when Mark Ingram was suspended. Now, Ingram's on a new team. They did sign Latavius Murray to be the backup, but I think this just means we're going to see a lot more Alvin Kamara. It's going to be very exciting to see what he can do with that team, especially – there is going to be some question marks because I don't believe we're going to see Drew Brees last 5 more years in the league. So this kind of could go either way, but I'm saying based off of what he's shown since coming into the league, he's going to be one of those top 5 fantasy guys.
I 100% considered adding him to the list, but you mentioned the reason why, and that's Drew Brees. Drew Brees, if they go to the Super Bowl next year and win, couldn't you see him retiring?
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. I think if it would have happened, if they would have got there this year and won, I mean, we might not even see him in the NFL at this point.
Yeah, and we don't know what that offense looks like without Drew Brees, but I guarantee that teams key more on the running backs, especially Kamara, because you know what kind of a spark plug he can be. So I think that depends solely on whether Drew Brees is still around or not, or whether Drew Brees' production continues to be high. And that's the only reason I didn't put Alvin Kamara on my list. But number 3, I have Patrick Mahomes, probably going to be the top quarterback drafted over the next 3 to 5 years. And if he puts up the kind of stats that he did this year, he's all but a lock to be the first quarterback drafted in most people's fantasy drafts. I don't really see him going anywhere, especially with his weapons, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce still there, and always being able to kind of find some sort of makeshift running game, even with Damian Williams there. And eventually you'd think they would have to get a good running back that's even more, has more of a reputation than Damian Williams, or can do a little bit more out of the backfield than Damian Williams, and that's only going to help Mahomes. So I think he's here to stay for the next 5 years.
Yeah, Mahomes definitely a very good choice. I do have him in my top 5. I don't have him at 3. I do have him somewhere near the top. So I definitely do like that pick. And obviously, I think he is the best quarterback to be in the top 5 over the next 5 years. With him being a young quarterback, he's in a very good situation with the team he's on right now. And some of these other quarterbacks that you could consider putting in there are kind of getting towards the end of their career. So it's kind of tough to really tell if any one of those other quarterbacks could even be in the top 5. I think he's definitely the best case for being in the top 5 based off of a lot of characteristics for him. So definitely do love that pick. My number 3, I actually have another running back, and that's Christian McCaffrey for the Panthers. Now, I've been really high on him this year. I think he has the potential to get 1,000 rushing and 1,000 receiving yards. So I do think that one of these 5 years he will actually end up doing that. And because of that, he will lead fantasy leagues in points during one of these 5 years. But I just think he's in a scenario right now where they're starting to give him more opportunities. They did realize that they can't give him too much because he starts to tire out. But he's going to get these opportunities. And if Cam Newton's healthy, that's going to keep him in the top 5, specifically the top 3 where I have him.
I think that's a really good pick, Ian. He's definitely an emerging young star in the NFL. At my number 2 spot, I have a guy that you already mentioned, Odell Beckham Jr., and I agree with a lot of the reasons that you said. Is he's going to be the premier player on an offense that's supposed to score a lot of points and is going to be pass first. And we saw last year Baker Mayfield just heaves balls up into the air, and if someone's there to try and catch them, why not have it be Odell Beckham Jr. who can make circus catches? So I think that his numbers, I don't know if they're going to be better than they've been with New York, but they're going to be comparable at least.
Yeah, they're definitely going to be comparable, and he's definitely going to still be a Pro Bowler with this team that he's in. It's really going to be interesting to see what happens, though, when this team makes a playoff, because you do have to assume over these next 5 years that they do make the playoffs, because we have seen him struggle in the playoffs in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how that ends up happening. But for now, definitely a good pick for regular season fantasy for sure. My number 2, a guy you have already mentioned, that's Patrick Mahomes. This guy, like I said, we're clear. This guy is going to be the guy that gets in the top 5. He's in a great scenario, as I've summed up before, and definitely just fits the mold for being a top fantasy guy based off of last year.
Yeah, I think we kind of covered that with Odell Beckham Jr. and Patrick Mahomes. Is they're both players that seem like they're going to be here for a while. They're still in the young part of their career, so we don't expect them to be going anywhere. So my number 1, I have a feeling it could be your number 1 too. New York Giants running back Saquon Barkley. He's going to be the guy that I would draft first this year, and I don't see any reason why he can't keep that up over the next 5, barring potentially an injury. But he was so impressive with the Giants in a year where the Giants were a bad team, their offensive line was bad, and he was the lone bright spot, and he looked like he was doing it all himself. He's definitely a guy that you're going to want on your fantasy roster, especially if the Giants turn into a contender at some point in the next half decade.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one thing. My guy, he definitely did not play like a rookie last year, and that's why I'm in agreement with you. I do think it is Saquon Barkley. I mean, this guy you could make a case that this guy could have been in the MVP race last year if
his team was at all good.
Yeah, if his team was at all good or just at least in the playoff picture. But because they weren't, that's kind of why I think his season got overlooked because of what happened. I think a lot more people actually talked about Baker Mayfield's rookie season because of what he did turning Cleveland around to actually winning games than what Saquon Barkley did. Now, this guy's been a phenomenal asset to the Giants. I think a lot of people question why they took a running back or two, but they took a stud with the number 2 pick a couple years ago. They could have went with a quarterback, but I think they made the right decision going with a running back that's definitely going to be there for the foreseeable future. If they lose this guy, this is going to be one of the worst things that happens to the Giants. So it's a good thing. A lot of people are going to draft this guy in fantasy going forward, and over these next 5 years, he's definitely going to be that top guy.
Yeah, I think I'll take him number 1 this year if I were to get that number 1 pick. I think he's the safest bet that you'd have if you were to, say, hold on to a player over the next seasons.
Yep. With our league coming up, if you do end up getting the first pick, I'm definitely going to be like, well, he's off the board. Going to look at my next guy.
You're going to take Christian McCaffrey.
I probably would. Are you saying ahead of Barkley?
Ahead of perhaps anyone. If you got the number 1 overall pick, you might take Christian McCaffrey.
He would be in the discussion. Barkley would be in the discussion too. So, honestly, I might have to flip a coin for one of those two.
I don't think that either of them would be a bad choice this year.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But it's just one of those ones where you want both, but it's too hard to decide just because they're so dominant for their teams.
I think Christian McCaffrey would be a statement move because people would be expecting it less.
Yeah, I do think so as well. But like I said, Saquon was a top 10 pick last year, I believe, and he was a rookie, and you really don't see rookies get drafted top 10 in fantasy.
Yep, and this year, Josh Jacobs. He drafted top 10, but I think he could have a good season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see where he ends up in fantasy. But with that, Ryan, that does bring us to another conclusion of Touchdown Tuesday. So what final thoughts do you have for the viewers this week?
Thank you, everyone, for continuing to listen and support. You can catch us on YouTube live when we do this show, usually early in the week in the evening, or you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and Spreaker.
Yeah, perfect. Again, thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of Touchdown Tuesdays. We are the official football podcast of Bruce Sports, as Ryan said. Check us out on iTunes, Google Play, Spreaker when they do post. Otherwise, if you want to stay up late with us during the week, definitely do feel free to check us out on YouTube. Make sure to check us out on Facebook and Twitter as well. Check out our question of the week and also check out our post regarding the news regarding the NFL, college football, all the sports, all of the associations regarding the NFL. But again, thank you for listening this week. We look forward to bringing you more training camp news next week. Take care, everyone.